Hi, my name is James Hayman, and this is Musings of a Murderous Mind. Today I'd like to read you the third part of my first McCabe Savage thriller, The Cutting. As you may recall, at least if you've watched the first two, you know that McCabe is just coming back from an empty scrapyard where they discovered the body of a teenage girl with her heart cut surgically from her body. He goes back to the office determined to find out what's going on. This is part 3. 2 foam cups partially filled with cold coffee greeted McCabe at his desk. He checked his messages. There were 2 from his boss, Lieutenant Bill Fortier. In the first, Fortier delivered fair warning that Chief Tom Shockley was going to take a personal interest in this case. In the second, he asked McCabe to set up a detectives meeting for the morning to organize the investigation. Finally, there was one from the great man himself, Portland Police Chief Thomas H. Shockley. "Hey, Mike, it's Tom Shockley. We need to talk about Dubois ASAP. I'm giving a speech at a fundraiser tonight. I can fend off the press till tomorrow, but then I'll need a complete update. Meantime, don't you talk to the media. I'll handle that. Give me a call at home tomorrow a.m. You got the number." McCabe knew Shockley liked making any and all public statements on major cases himself. He thought he was better at it than anyone else in the department, and that was probably true. Shockley was a political animal, and McCabe knew that could be useful even in a small city like Portland. Still, it amazed him how much the chief loved looking at himself on TV. As usual, McCabe's desk was a chaos of paper, none of it critical and all of it irrelevant to the Dubois case. He swept it in a batch into the left-hand drawer of his desk. The important stuff, files from ongoing cases, was already locked safely in the right-hand drawer on top of a pair of Casey ski mittens. The background on the Dubois case wasn't among it. He pulled the missing persons file on Katie Dubois and brought it back to his desk. He'd read it once, but he wanted to go over it more carefully now that he knew for sure her death was homicide. As he sat, he glanced at Casey's mischievous face, age 7, beaming up at him from within the confines of a metal picture frame. The simple fact that Casey was now just a couple of years younger than the girl dumped in the scrapyard somehow made this case more personal. Not more important, just more personal. McCabe opened the file. Right in front were 3 digital photographs of Katie Dubois alive. The first was a family shot from her last birthday. He checked date of birth in a personal info data form. The birthday was 2 months earlier, July 16th. In the picture, Katie looked even prettier than he'd thought. She was sitting in front of a big white cake with 2 candles on it in the shape of a 1 and a 6, sweet 16. Her lips formed an exaggerated pucker, mugging for the camera, ready to blow out the candles. He wondered what she'd wished for. Whatever it wasn't what she got. The second picture was the one they posted around town and gave to the media. It was a formal close-up, having sort of a Sears portrait studio look about it. The third one showed Katie wearing a Portland High School soccer uniform, standing on the field with her mother, probably just after a game. Other players and fans could be seen in the background. Both mother and daughter were smiling a little stiffly, as if someone had asked them to say cheese. Katie's mother, Joanne Seglia, looked younger than McCabe expected, probably under 40. She had reddish blonde hair, freckles. He checked the file for her maiden name, O'Leary. He had thought as much, and McCabe will always recognize an O'Leary. She had the same shaped face and mouth as Katie. There was a similarity in the eyes as well, but the energetic, fresh-faced prettiness of the daughter was gone from the mother. He put the phone back and skimmed the file summary of the missing persons report. He'd read it before, and there wasn't much that stood out. Casey was Joanne Seglia's only child. Katie's father, Louis Dubois, was a commercial fisherman who drowned 10 years back when the trawler he was working on capsized in an ice storm off the Georges Bank. All hands were lost. Dubois' body never recovered. 2 years later, in 1997, Joanne married Frank Seglia. Seglia made a good living as a union pipe fitter, probably $40 an hour, possibly more. The only thing to notice about him was the auto track report Tom Tasco had recorded, showing Seglia had done a little time for petty drug dealing when he was a kid, followed by a couple of years on probation. He'd been clean ever since. McCabe skimmed Tasco and Frazier's interview summaries and case reports. They'd done a thorough job. They'd conducted scores of interviews. They grilled her boyfriend, Ronnie Sobel. They gamely followed up on every tipster's call, and there'd been dozens. Despite these efforts, the department hadn't come close to finding Katie or preventing her death. McCabe put the reports back in their jacket. He tapped the computer to life and Googled the name Elise Anderson. He got 437 hits. He found the one he was looking for on page 2, an article in the Orlando Sentinel dated April 2nd, 2 years earlier. McCabe remembered reading it on a flight from Orlando back to LaGuardia. He'd taken Casey down to Disney World for spring break. The idea had been to cheer her up after he and her mother Sandy, the beautiful Cassandra, Casey's namesake, had divorced McCabe. McCabe hadn't thought about Sandy in a long time. The familiar refrain, selfish bitch, came instantly to mind. He supposed Sandy's new life, married to an investment banker, commuting between a fancy house in the Hamptons and a 9-room co-op on West End Avenue in Manhattan, suited her better than being the wife of a cop ever had. Still, McCabe wondered how comfortable she was, having walked out not just on a failed marriage, but also on her only child. She told McCabe the banker didn't want to be burdened with kids, at least not somebody else's kids. He forced Sandy to choose between having money and having a daughter. McCabe wasn't surprised that she'd chosen money. That's just the way Sandy was. There was nothing anybody could do to change it. He wasn't bothered for himself, but he'd never forgiven Sandy for what she'd done to Casey. The news story he was looking for sprang back to life in McCabe's mind as he read. Quote, a construction crew working for the D.J. Pozzoli Construction Company of Orlando yesterday unearthed the decomposed remains of a nude woman, later identified as 26-year-old Elise Anderson of Winter Park. Ms. Anderson, a sales representative with Mulvaney Real Estate in Orlando, was reported missing 3 weeks ago by her husband, Martin Anderson, also of Winter Park. The source at the Orange County Medical Examiner's office told the Sentinel the cause of death had been the surgical removal of Miss Anderson's heart. McCabe closed out the page. He remembered the rest of the article pretty much verbatim. Orlando police were following several leads. There was no mention of additional wounds, but the article did include the name of the lead detective on the case, Sergeant Aaron Cahill. McCabe looked through the rest of the hits on the Google search and found one follow-up article. Apparently, Sergeant Cahill's leads had led nowhere, and the case went cold. McCabe decided to wait until after the autopsy, when he would know more about the manner and cause of Katie Dubois' death, before contacting Sergeant Cahill of the Orlando PD. Excuse me. McCabe printed out the article and slipped it into a brand new murder book. Then he picked up the coffee cups and walked them to the small kitchen at the back of the bullpen. He poured the dregs down the sink. One of McCabe's detectives, Jack Batchelder, stood nearby making a fresh pot. Hey, Mike, bad night, huh? At least that's what I heard. Batchelder was a balding, overweight man of 50. In McCabe's view, Jack was pretty much of a burned-out case, putting in time, padding his pension with a few more years before calling it quits. Yeah, I guess you heard right, Jack. Anything else going on? McCabe asked. The usual Friday night mayhem. A couple of domestics, a kid got beaten up in a brawl down by the ferry terminal. No, yeah, there's another missing persons report. Woman named Cassidy. Works for an ad agency here in town. Beckman and Hawes. Her ex-husband called it in about 8 o'clock. McCabe looked up. That was about the same time he and Kira were arriving at Arno and Lacey was sneaking into the scrapyard. Who took the call? Bill and Will. They should be talking with the ex now. Detectives Bill Bacon and Will Messing had been universally known by their rhyming first names since McCabe had teamed them up a year earlier. Carl Sturgis joined them by the sink. Hey, McCabe, he said in that shrill, terrier-like bark of his. That homeless guy they brought in. He didn't have shit to say. He was just sneaking into the scrapyard for a couple of snorts. Found the body, started running around screaming until he found Comiskey. End of story. Except he was pissed I didn't offer him a drink. Big joker. Says you promised him some booze. I told him that was up to you to keep your promises. I mean, you didn't really do that, did you? Don't believe everything you hear, Carl, McCabe said, pouring himself a fresh coffee. But thanks for asking. McCabe tossed $1 into the can next to the coffee pot. Where is he now? I got a uniform to drop him off down by a shelter. I told him to let us know where we could find him. Fat chance. McCabe took the coffee back to his desk and called Bill Bacon's cell. It looked like it was going to be a long night. Bacon picked up. Hiya, Mike. Where are you guys? In the car. You heard about our missing person. We had just finished with her ex-husband. Says he's very upset. I personally think he's full of shit. Anyway, we're on our way to her apartment. Back it up, Bill. Give me the 2-minute drill on this. Okay, missing woman is Lucinda Cassidy. She's 28 years old, works for an ad agency on Free Street, Beckman and Hawes. Bacon sounded like he was reading from his notes. Young management type. She was supposed to meet her ex-husband for dinner at Tony's at 6:30. Guy named Dave Farrington. They've been divorced less than a year. She's not there when he arrives. He orders a drink and waits. By 7, she still hasn't turned up, which he says is very unlike her. He orders another drink and starts making calls. First, he tries calling her numbers. There's no answer either on her landline or cell or at the office. So next he looks up her boss's home number and reaches him. The boss, a John Beckman of Beckman and Hawes, says she never showed up for work this morning. He's pissed because she missed some big meeting or something. Tells Farrington he thought maybe she was sick or maybe there was a family crisis, but when she didn't answer her phone, he didn't know what to think. Naturally, the schmuck doesn't think to call us. You said you thought the ex was full of shit. You think he had something to do with the disappearance? I wouldn't say that. Not yet, anyway. I think he's just a slick-ass jack who's a little too full of himself. Anyway, Farrington next calls Cassidy's sister, his ex-sister-in-law. She hasn't heard from Lucinda in a couple of days, so now he's really worried. He calls 911 about 8, wants to know if there have been any accidents reported or if anyone brought her into any of the local hospitals. The answer was no. Dispatch routes the call to us. First thing, we go to Tony's to talk to Farrington, who's still there, having yet another drink. Then we go with him to her apartment to see if maybe she's home and just not answering her phone. She's not. At least there are no lights on, and she's not answering the door either. Is that it? McCabe asked. Not quite. Will checks her vehicle and plate numbers and sends out an ATL just in case she's on the road somewhere. About an hour later, we get a call from a unit on the west side, Connie Davenport. Cassidy's car has been found, beige '09 Corolla, parked on Vaughn Street by the old cemetery. Neighbor tells Davenport the Coroller's been there all day. Turns out Lucinda's a jogger. She runs every morning, usually on the West End. Farrington told us she was training for a 10K. Bill Bacon stopped talking and there was silence on the phone. What are you thinking, Billy? Mike, I got a bad feeling about this one, he said finally. I just called the evidence techs to check out the scene on Vaughn. Then I want them to flatbed the car to 109, and check it for prints, blood, fibers, the works. It's going to be a busy night for the techs. Yeah, I guess for all of us. Like I said, we're pulling up to the apartment now. Landlord's meeting us here with the key. If she still doesn't answer the door, he said he'd let us in. Another pause. I'll call you back. Is Farrington still with you? Now I got a uniform to take him down to the station to give us a set of prints. We'll check for matches both in the apartment and in the Corolla, but I'll bet he can prove he's been in both places before. I'll wait for your call, McCabe said, and then hung up the phone. Next, McCabe called Lieutenant Bill Fortier at home. Fortier's wife, Millie, answered. She went to get him. In the background, McCabe could hear sounds of the Sox game. Yeah, Mike, what's up? McCabe filled him in on what was going on at the scrapyard and what Bacon had told him about Lucinda Cassidy. You think she... Excuse me. You think she just took off, leaving her car sitting there on the street? I don't think so. You think it's the same guy? Fortier asked. He sounded like he was munching on something crunchy. Well, it seems like the timing's all wrong, but who the hell knows? Our boy would have to finish with one Vic and right away go pick up another. Most freaks don't work that way. Yeah, doesn't killing one usually satisfy the lust for a while? It's supposed to, but all these sadistic whack jobs have their own little quirks. Anyway, nobody's killed Cassidy yet, at least as far as we know, so let's not hurry her along. You think I should come in, get everybody together tonight? No, I'd rather have our people on the street tonight than sitting in a conference room. They know what they're doing, and I can coordinate by cell. If the same guy's responsible, we ought to get a jump on it. Besides, there's not much to report yet. And like I said, Cassidy may still be alive. All right, but we'd better make quick progress or the wrath of Shockley will come down on all our heads. Excuse me. As he hung up the phone, McCabe looked up to see Maggie leaning against his desk. Nearly 6 feet tall, she was a lean, slightly gawky-looking woman with bright, searching eyes. McCabe always thought she looked more like a college professor than a cop. So, he asked. Parents think the boyfriend's to blame, she said. According to Tasco's report, he and Katie were seen arguing just before she walked off and disappeared. But he's got a solid alibi, isn't that right? Yep. There were 5 other kids in the group. They all say he stayed with them for at least 2 hours after Katie left, which would have been about midnight. After that, he says he went home to bed. His mother says he got home around 12:30. She was still up. What did her parents say about him? They didn't much like him. They see him as being pretty much an operator. Stepfather says Katie came in drunk a couple of times after dates with Sobel, and she was out all night more than once. Having sex? The mother thinks so. Says Katie had a prescription for birth control pills, and she told her always to carry condoms. Don't depend on the guy to carry condoms. That seemed to have been the sum total of her motherly advice. Oh, that's pretty good advice. Yeah, but it shouldn't end there, said Maggie. Not for a 16-year-old. Come on, Mag. You know as well as I do, Sobel as the murderer just doesn't figure. You don't acquire the skills to neatly remove a human heart cutting up frogs in biology class. Plus, if he did kidnap her, where does he keep her for a week before he kills her? Under his bed at home? Yeah, I know. Where are the parents now? They're on their way home. I paid for a cab. Maggie paused, waiting for McCabe to react. He didn't. I'm putting in for it, she said. I expect to be reimbursed. Did I say anything? Fortier's the Scrooge around here, not me. Don't pull that Mr. Innocent stuff with me, McCabe. Fortier's afraid of you. He'll do whatever you tell him to do. What makes you think he's afraid of me? Well, you're smarter than he is, and he knows it. Plus that memory thing of yours, always calling up little-known facts out of thin air. That really makes him nervous. He always thinks you're going to show him up in public, or even worse, around Shockley. Excuse me. How much was the cab? Asked McCabe. I gave them $10. I don't expect the Seglias will send back any change. $10, McCabe explained in mock alarm. But before Maggie could react, he said, sure, put in for it. By the way, another shoe just dropped. What sort of shoe? We've got a brand new missing person. Oh, Jesus, already? McCabe filled Maggie in on Lucinda Cassidy's disappearance. Are we assuming it's the same guy? Maggie pulled her own desk chair across to McCabe's desk and sat down. She produced a big bag of rolled gold pretzels, poured a mound of them on the desk, put her feet up, and started munching. It's a definite possibility. Whoever arranged Katie's body so artfully out there in the scrapyard was showing off. He's preening. He wants us to notice him. I'd love to minimize the media feeding frenzy and deny him the pleasure. Well, I don't think that'll be possible, said Maggie. We've got the gruesome murder of a teenage girl. Add in Cassidy's disappearance, and they'll be all over it. Shockley will be thrilled. McCabe's phone rang. He checked his watch. It was after midnight. Bill Bacon was on the other end. What did you find? He silently signaled Maggie to pick up the other line. Not much, said Bill. It's a 4-unit house on Pine Street. Cassidy's got a 1-bedroom on the top floor. Place is a mess. Beds unmade, lipstick and mascara and other girl stuff scattered around the bathroom. There's one dirty dinner dish in the sink and the remains of a frozen pizza in the trash. Her briefcase is on the couch in the living room with papers from her office scattered around. Her laptop's there, too. She was probably working at home last night. Getting ready for the big meeting Beckman was talking about. Kind of looks that way. Anything else? Yeah. Farrington said she had a dog. Small mongrel named Fritz. There's dog stuff around the apartment. Dog bed in her bedroom, food bowl in the kitchen, but there's no leash, no dog. He also said she was a runner, but I don't see any running shoes. My guess is she took the dog for a run this morning and never made it home. She was supposed to be at work at 8:30, so it had to be early. What time did the neighbor spot the car? She said first thing, around 7. Okay, let's get as many people as we can, scouring areas where people jog, starting on the west end where we found her car. Without being asked, Maggie left to make the necessary calls. Any photos of her in the apartment? Yeah, plenty. I said, and Farrington gave me one. He was still carrying it in his wallet. McCabe told Bacon to meet them on the western pond and hung up. Maggie was back in less than 5 minutes. I managed to round up half a dozen uniforms, plus a couple of detectives from across the hall. Bill and Will make 10, you and me make an even dozen. I think that's about it, or at least it is until morning. What about Tasco and Frazier? They're working the neighborhood around the scrapyard. Let's take Botchelder. If nothing else, the walk-in will do Jack good. We'll leave Carl here. Somebody should be manning the phones, and I don't think I can bear spending the night listening to Carl whining about how wet he's getting. 10 minutes later, McCabe and Maggie joined a dozen wet cops combing Portland's western promenade and adjacent neighborhoods for any trace of Lucinda Cassidy. They'd broken up into teams. McCabe and Maggie, along with Jack Batchelder and Officer Connie Davenport, were moving along the western edge of the prom itself. The rain was heavier now, and McCabe knew it might be washing away evidence. About 15 minutes after they'd started, Officer Davenport called out, "Hey, I think I found something. Look at this." She was shining her flashlight on a wet Portland Sea Dogs baseball cap that had been partially hidden by weeds protruding from the edge of the steep drop-off that bordered the far side of the prom. "Could be hers," said Connie. She knelt above the cap, poked a ballpoint pen under the little Velcro strap on the back. She slid the cap into an evidence bag. If the cap was Cassidy's, there might be more evidence nearby. McCabe peered over the drop-off. "I'm going down to have a look." He handed Maggie his gun and holster. He figured that was a sensible precaution against accidentally shooting himself should he slip and fall on the way down. "I'm supposed to be management, you know," McCabe wisecracked to the others. "I'm not supposed to be doing this shit." Nobody laughed. The only response came from Jack Batchelder. "Don't break your leg, he said. "It's dark, and the rain's made that sucker slippery." "Thanks, Jack. I'll do my best." McCabe stepped backward over the edge and began working his way down the wet, weedy embankment. Rivulets of water trickled past him, cutting small indentations in the soil. He had no rain gear, and water was soaking through his thin jacket to his skin. Drops of rain slid behind the collar of his shirt and traced their way down his back. Holding the flashlight in his right hand, he created handholds with his left wherever he could find them. He crisscrossed the slope, shining his flashlight left and right, not quite sure what he was looking for. He was breathing heavily, a little surprised by how tricky the descent was proving to be. He made himself a promise to cut down on the scotch and hit the gym at least 3 times a week. Well, 2 anyway. About 50 yards from the top, the small rock outcropping McCabe was using as a toehold gave way, and before he could stop himself, he slid a good 10 feet on his chest through muddy, stony soil. He came to a painful stop against a tree root. His flashlight landed about 3 to 4 feet to his right. It was still on. About 10 feet beyond the flashlight, reflected in the flickering beam, 2 black eyes stared back at him. McCabe lay perfectly still, slowing his breathing, carefully watching whatever it was that was watching him. He could hear the voices of the others shouting from the top. "Hey, Mike, are you all right? Did you hurt yourself?" He didn't shout back for fear of startling the animal, or whatever the hell it was. A cat, maybe a big rat. With his left hand, he scooped a small handful of wet soil and tossed it in the direction of the eyes. Nothing. He gingerly nudged his body a foot or so toward the light. Still nothing. He slid another foot, then another. He wrapped his hand around the barrel of the light and lifted it up. Still no movements. The shouts from the top grew more insistent. He pointed the light directly at the eyes. They shone back brightly. Now he could see the shape of a face, a white muzzle, a black nose. He crawled toward it. Not wanting to shout, he pulled out his cell and hit Maggie's number. "Are you okay?" she asked. "Yeah, I'm okay," he told her. "I found her dog. It's dead." And that is the end of the 3rd episode of the first Savage McCabe thriller called The Cutting. As I said before, it's available by order from any bookstore or from Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all the other online booksellers. If you've enjoyed the first 3 episodes, perhaps you'd prefer reading the rest. But in any event, I will be back with episode number 4 in just a few days. In any event, it's been fun chatting with you, and let's do it again soon.